What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And today we're going to talk about why there are so many murders within the California Department of Corrections recently. So far this year, and mind you, we're not even halfway through May, there have been 10 murders within CDC. High Desert and Folsom in January, High Desert in February, Kern in March, Folsom also in March, and Wasco, Kern in April, and then Folsom, Kern Valley, and Salinas Valley State Prison so far this month. And there will probably be more murders this month and murders every other month of the year. And so why is this happening, right? This has not always been the case. I was incarcerated from 1996 until 2005. And in that time span, the murder rate within the Department of Corrections was lower than it has been over the last handful of years, right? About 10 years. And why is that? So one factor, I think, is you got a lot of dudes that came out the shoe, right? And a lot of those guys are leaders or strong sympathizers of prison-based gangs or criminal organizations that operate in prison. And so the NF, for example, the Nuestra Familia, it has a blood in, blood out oath, right? In terms of you need to bring a body in order to join the NF. And it has to be a body that you took for the cause, right? It can't be like some gang-banging body on the streets and then that counts. Now, that's not always followed, but technically that's the way it's supposed to be. And then obviously once you commit for life. And so those guys were back there in the shoe, and on the main lines when people were getting removed, a lot of them were getting whacked with razors, right? So people would get cut with razors, which aren't likely to kill you, I mean, unless you get somewhere like ear to ear, but they're not likely to kill you. And their intent wasn't necessarily to kill you, right? The intent was to mark you so that if you were to go other places and people see a scar on your face or your neck or your head, they would question who you are and investigate, right? So we didn't have cell phones in prison back then. And so you'd have to shoot a kite somewhere, a letter, wait to get word back. That background process could be some time consuming, and sometimes things would get missed, right? Depending on who your channels were and whatnot. There's some information that you might not receive about somebody, and maybe their paperwork is not bad, but their history within the gang is. And so that mark would cause you to really drill down further and make sure that there's an answer for that scar that allows them to still function within the household. You also had 3 strikes and that sort of thing. And so as hermanos, as bros, our goal was not to help people stay in prison, right? Our goal was for people to get out. We got enough people in prison. And so weren't trying to strike out folks, right? And if sacrifices had to be made, then so be it. And not to say that nobody got killed in prison, but it was not near as common as it has been lately. Well, those NF guys back in the shoe used to kind of mock and demean those who came back there for cutting people, because in their mindset, if you're going to remove somebody, you better do your damnedest to kill them. And if you weren't, then it was kind of a chicken shit move. Now, those guys hadn't been on main lines in many years, oftentimes. The prison environment was just different when they were back out on the yards. And so it's kind of easy for them to pontificate from in the shoe. And not to say that some of them weren't killers. Some of them were not, right? But not to say that some weren't. But it was just a different value system. And it's real easy when you're sending other people to go do your dirt, right? And the whole notion of when I was young, this is how things went. And that's true to some degree with every group segment. And a lot of group segments were not using pieces on people. They were using razors, rarely used pieces. And even then, a lot of times the people didn't get killed, right? Because the goal is for the hitter to get away. And then you got bombers, right? So the person that uses the weapon gets away. And then to help them get away, a couple other people go and occupy the victim by beating them up, right? Or trying to, at least. And so it was just different, right? People weren't tying knives to their hands and going at it. You know what I mean? That's stuff from the 70s. right? And maybe early 80s. But so that's a factor. And because now those NF dudes and those MA dudes and A beers and everybody else is in the general population. So when they're deeming people, when they say somebody has to go, they are mandating that these northerners and these norteños that do these moves do so with the absolute intent to kill them. And if you don't appear to have tried to kill your target, then you may face discipline and you may face consequences for not fulfilling your duty, right? For not fulfilling what you were assigned to do. And so that's a heck of an incentive for people, right? There's also the factor that, these prison gang dudes weren't on the yard before. Now they are. Everybody knows what the requirements are. Everybody knows, to some degree at least, what it takes to join these organizations. And unfortunately, some of these youngsters on these main lines, and not so young, but maybe young-minded, they still have aspirations to reach the highest levels. And the NF within the California Department of Corrections went on a recruiting spree. And I mean, I think that's for different reasons, and maybe that's a topic for another video, but they went on a recruiting spree and was taking in a lot of people. And so I think there's an incentive, again, for that population of folks to get a body, right? So that you check that box of what it takes to join the O. Now, obviously, there's other boxes to check. The vast majority of people are not going to be invited to join the organization. That's just how it works. They control the pie, and the less people there are getting a slice, the bigger the slices are. It's sort of basic math. And, especially for a predatory capitalist organization. So, and I think something similar exists within the other group segments, right? I'm more comfortable speaking about the North in this case, but a lot of all these organizations essentially function the same. They may have different rhetoric. They may have different propaganda. They may frame it up a little bit different, but their ultimate priority is money, and their overwhelming desire is to send other people to do work. And it is entertainment for them, right? Because it makes the mob look good if when you mess up, you get killed, right? And it instills a level of discipline, really fear, in the manpower, right? If I mess up, like, they ain't just going to whip my ass. They're just, not just going to cut me. They're going to try to kill me. And so that's part of it, right? And I found some statistics, which I'll show you here. So this is only willful homicides by other inmates, right? And if you look at 2011, there was roughly 17, right? 2011 is pre-end of hostilities. The agreement hadn't even been made, right? That agreement happened in 2012, but everybody was still back in the shoe, and homicides started to drop. And then look, 2013, they dropped. All the way down to 2014, they're at 8 murders throughout the Department of Corrections. We're over that now, right? And it's only early May. And so I think part of the reason of that is folks were told to calm down because the big homies, so to speak, wanted to get out to the yard, right? And was pushing us into hostilities. And if there's a bunch of people getting whacked and a bunch of people getting hit, then it's not a good look for them to be able to come back out on the main lines. So around 2014, a lot of them are coming out, right? Or at least some are starting to come out. And then what happens to the numbers? Over the next couple of years, it shoots up to 22 in a year, right? Mind you, again, this year we are on pace for more than 22 homicides in 2022. But it shoots up. It drops down a little bit, around 2017. It hits back up around 2018. 2019, it drops a little. It doesn't drop anywhere close to what it did around 2014. And then now 2020, it's headed off the charts, right? It's just headed out of nowhere. And then obviously we see in 2022, it is continuing the trend of being off the charts. And I'll leave that up there for you guys can look. And so that's part of it. And it's interesting because the groups themselves in the general population, they're not going to war, right? These are not people getting killed in north-south riots. These are not people getting killed in black-white riots or Black South or North-Wide or others or whatever, right? These are overwhelmingly removals ordered by the leadership on the yard or cellies killing their cellie, right? And part of that is, and there's a lawsuit in CDC now that's been going on for a while, but a lot of these mental health cases, a lot of these folks that are frankly radically mentally ill were put in the general population and not provided the services that they need. And again, when these organizations came out, it was strongly implemented that if you are triple CMS, right, which triple CMS, I forget what it stands for, but it means that you take hot meds in prison. Hot meds are psychotropic meds that cause you to have an adverse reaction to being in the heat, right? And so if it gets, I think, over 90 degrees, then you have to be allowed to go into the day room. You have access to ice, all this other stuff to keep those folks from passing out or worse. Well, if you're triple CMS, you can't function with these prison organizations, right? Because you're considered mentally unstable, weak, etc. And so you have folks that should be taking psych meds who aren't because they want to be viewed in a favorable light. They want to be able to kick it with the homies. But they snap, right? They snap and kill their cellies. Some of those cellies that got killed were killed as removals. Because again, these the mob, the mafia, the brand, they don't care if you go home, right? It doesn't matter. And so, yeah, man, kill your cellie. Obviously, you're not going to get away with it. Oh, well, you sacrifice for the cause. That's how it goes. And some of these guys are lifers, but some of them aren't, right? The other thing is, with these prison organizations out there, oddly enough, I think there's more bad calls now than there was before. And those bad calls, maybe there's not more bad calls, but when a bad call is made now, the person is murdered. As opposed to before, a bad call is made, you might get cut, you can go to the hole, plead your case, get cleared, blah, blah, blah. It has happened numbers of times, right? Dozens and dozens and dozens of times. But when you're dead, you're dead. And there's no get backs and there's no clarifying. And so, and the people making these bad calls are senior leaders. So who's going to hold them accountable? Unless they're killing somebody that is in favor with other canales, right? With other leaders of the organizations, then nobody cares, right? I take that back. A lot of people care, but nobody in leadership cares. It's a casualty of war, but it's a casualty of war with your own people. And there's a lot more petty calls being made, I had a homeboy, Rascal, that was killed in Salinas Valley in 2018. And he was killed as a removal. And he was hustling. He was making a lot of money in prison. Hustling cell phones, hustling other things. And he was breaking off a good chunk to the household, so to speak. Right? He wasn't a selfish person like that. But he also did a little bit of freelancing. Right? He supported his whole family from inside prison. And so, yeah, there was a little bit of freelancing. There was a little bit of extra. But it's not as if he was not contributing substantially to the household out of the proceeds of his hustle. They're money hungry, right? And so, man, if I don't get what I want from every dollar that you get, and you don't let me know every dollar that you get, you can die. And that's what happened. They killed him in what I insist to this day is a bad call, though there's nothing that I can really do about it. Isaac also was killed in Salinas Valley in 2020. I know both these dudes from the streets. They're good guys, right? They were good guys in the streets, and they handled their business in prison. Isaac Selly killed him, right? This dude out of Fresno, and there's various stories why. But I think the one thing I've heard that rings pretty true is Isaac was Rascal's boy. Like, they was hitting Bay Area cats like crazy in Salinas Valley. And you had cats from the Bay that were perfectly good soldiers that were locking it up and going to the other side because they're like, damn, I'm next. I haven't done anything wrong, but I'm next. And when they kill me, I can't plead my case. So I think those are some of the reasons that you're seeing a lot more murders in CDC lately, which is a little bit crazy because, again, you would think an end to hostilities would lead to less violence. And it has led to less violence between groups, but within groups, there's a lot. And you also have to remember, there's a bloodlust on the part of all these organizations. They're not fighting with anybody else, but there has to be a conflict. There has to be an enemy, because otherwise, what's the incentive of people to fall in line with you, right? What are you protecting them against? What are you securing them against? What is the threat that you're promising to stand alongside them during? It's not, it's not the Mexican Mafia. It's not the NF. It's not the Aryan Brotherhood, right? Like, those groups don't have to worry about one another getting at them, at least not yet. But they have to have an enemy. So then the enemy comes from within, right? This fool's not falling in line. That fool's not falling in line. And you need to have these removals, and you need to have this violence, because it instills fear in everybody else. And in some of them, it instills a sense of aspiration, right? You too can be a big homie if you just kill somebody, right? Another thing is, CDC is not punishing people for violence the way that they used to. I don't want to say the way they should, but the way they used to. I'm not in favor of people going to the hole. I'm not in favor of most people going to prison. And so I'm not suggesting that CDC slam everybody down. I fought for many years while I was incarcerated, and years since I've been home from prison, against this idea of slamming people down, solitary confinement, and whatnot. So don't mistake me as saying, CDC needs to punish people worse. But the reality is the lack of consequence for conflicts, right? So, for example, if you stab somebody, unless they see you using the weapon to stab somebody, but if it's just a little ruckus, right? 3-on-1, and that person gets stabbed and killed, if they can't pick who used the knife, then ain't nobody getting charged, right? If there's a riot, my last video where I talked about the Flores and the Bulldogs taking off on the Northerner, the white guy, and the Southerner. Those guys, there was 10 of them, and they stomped the hell out of the Southerner in the wood. The Northerner had a knife, so he was able to kind of protect himself a little bit. He didn't stab nobody, but he didn't get stomped. All those guys got snatched up and brought back to their cells, right? All of the people that rushed them, they all just got put back in their cells. Now, they went to ADSEC the next day only because the wood was so thoroughly smashed, he had great bodily injuries. And if you have great bodily injuries, then you got to go to ADSEC if you're caught issuing those injuries, right? So it's just a different time. And folks can get away with stuff that you really weren't able to get away with in years prior. So anyways, man, don't go to prison. It's for people like me and a lot of folks that I talk to that did time and did their time the right way and blah, blah, blah. During the 90s, this is not a familiar space to any of us. I mean, I'm thankful I'm not in prison no matter the era. But this is a rough time to be in the California Department of Corrections. If you're programmed on the GP side. Now, these 50-50 yards, these integrated yards, there's violence there as well, right? And they're getting fractured because you have people who historically weren't on S&Y yards. Historically, they were in general population, and their points drop, and they go to a yard where there's a lot of programming, but it's quote-unquote 50-50, which every prison gang views those yards as no good yards, not like half of the people are good and half of them aren't, but, that's the narrative. So you have people that historically have been general population. They haven't sought protection. They haven't locked it up. They hadn't fallen out of favor with their people. They do fall out of favor because they stay on these yards, but they're like, man, I ain't never had it so good. So I'm going to go ahead and bite the bullet, avoid the chomos and whatnot, and just try to do my time. Those dudes, everybody has the propensity for violence, but some of those cats, they still only know one way to handle conflict, right? And so, and it's been well documented that the S and Y gangs are more kind of radical and unpredictable in their violence than the general population ones. And so it's just a different time in CDC. And I don't know how it gets resolved. They're talking about integrating the higher level yards. That's going to bring the murder rate through the roof because all those guys is coming out strapped, right? Everybody knows what's at risk, right? And it's your life. And at that point, it's not about the cause, the struggle, the movement. It's about survival. You know what I mean? If I know that me and you don't get along, and I know that you're going to try to kill me if we come in contact, then you best believe I'm going to try to kill you first. And not because I'm a tough guy. Shit, because I'm scared. I don't want you to kill me. Right? And so it's only going to get worse if CDC goes through with its plan to implement people. And you saw a small taste of that in Salinas Valley in C facility, just a couple days ago. So anyways, it's the Homie Hangout. Help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Check out the content, man. There's all kinds of stuff. I don't just talk about prison. I don't just talk about gangs. There's all sorts of things, man. So take a look, and we'll catch you next time.